Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm excited to continue our Sunday school class, this special combined Sunday school class where we're having parents from all three congregations join together. Last week, Jody started us off by talking about how have a discipleship plan with our kids, and how, especially, I think one of the most poignant things for me to see was just visually see the time that we have and how short it can become as our kids grow up. Today we're going to transition to the topic of anger as parents. And so just a little bit of an intro to these classes. We're teaching this in English just because we figured that when we have all three congregations together, that it's going to be the most commonly used one. And if you have kids that you're raising here in America, you probably know English, or at least have some capabilities with it. But we're going to be diving into some little bit deeper stuff today. And so if there's some words that you don't understand, feel free to ask someone to translate for you. Or honestly, you can even raise your hand and be like, can someone else in the room explain what that word means to me? Or we can try to explain it another way. And that is totally fine. The vision for this class also includes, we hope, the opportunity for parents of the different congregations to meet together and discuss. So we're going to be doing a little bit of speaking, just like Jody did last week, and then kick it back to you guys to do a little bit of talking amongst yourselves in some small groups. And this is certainly going to be more comfortable for you in your parent language, in your mother tongue, if you so desire. But this is also a really good opportunity for you to perhaps sit by someone who you don't know yet, or who's not from your same congregation, because folks from the Cantonese, or folks from the Mandarin, or folks from the English, the ways in which we parent and the ways in which we've been kind of taught to emphasize, things that we emphasize in parenting are a little bit different, and we can really learn some really important things from folks who are different from us in this church. And so that might be something really helpful for you as well. And so before we start, I'm actually going to give you guys an opportunity. I'm going to invite you to come a little bit closer. And if you would like to sit by someone that you don't know as well, you can do that. And so for our small group discussion times, I'm going to, just like last time, invite you guys to sit in groups of 3 or 4 households. So that might be, if there's just one parent here, then that's one household. If there's like a mom and dad from the same from the same family, then that's one household. But then you guys can kind of discuss amongst yourselves some of the things we're talking about. So if you would, please, those of you especially who are sitting farther in the back, get up and then move a little bit forward and find 2 or 3 other households to sit by, so that you can make them your small group for the rest of the session. I'm probably going to be standing more off to the side, just so you know. It's fine. I think it's probably really good for the beginning to stand here, just so I'm going to introduce you. But feel free to, move off to the side a little more if you want to later. It's up to you. I don't understand why you would. Standing in the corner. All right. Let me pray for us. God, thanks for this opportunity that we, as parents, get together and talk about some of these important things. Thank you for our children. Thank you that you have given us the gift of them. But God, we also know that they're a burden, and we have a big responsibility that you've laid on us to raise them. And so thank you for the many years of experience that are in this room, the collective wisdom. And God, I pray that as we talk about this topic of anger that every single one of us deals with as parents, as we're frustrated with things, I pray that you will, through your Spirit, allow us to share our wisdom with each other, so that we can perhaps from this day forward have a better understanding of our own issues with anger and how to respond better when we have this emotion. In Christ's name, amen. All right. So I'm teaching today with my wife, Jess. As a pastor here, I know that most, if not all of you, know our family. I grew up in a pastor's family, and so I know that everyone kind of just, you're all kind of on display all the time when you're a pastor's family. But can you click on it so that I can click? If you haven't seen our kids, this is what our family, what we hope that you see when you see our family. Like, everyone's smiling, everyone behaving really well. We have 3, Bethany is 6, Levi's 5, and Ezra's 2. But of course, this can be also what our family looks like. And we have no actual pictures of this. I actually looked, because when your family is having a meltdown, you tend not to bring the camera out. So we don't really have any pictures of this. But rest assured, Jess and I are normal human beings, and our kids that we are raising are also normal human beings. And we're all growing up. We're raising kids, and we ourselves are growing up with very human emotions. And so we're not coming at you today with all the answers and saying, like, we know how to do it, and this is how you should do it. We just think there are some things in our toolbox, and especially from Jess, who is a marriage and family therapist and deals and helps families deal with anger and high stress emotions and situations a lot, that hopefully you guys can use in your own families. So the first thing, though, before we kind of get into the super practical, I want us to have a theological foundation for anger. Not super deep, but we really got to ask, like, is anger a sin? Because I think growing up, and a lot of times my kind of gut instinct is to think of anger as this really sinful thing that we need to get rid of. But that's actually not the case. Like, anger is something that every single human being was given by God. And so one of the most helpful passages in Scripture, I think, when it comes to anger is this one from Mark, where Jesus, who is God incarnate in a body, it explicitly says he has anger. And he entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand, and the Pharisees watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man with the withered hand, "Come here." And he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill?" But they were silent. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. So again, this is God in a physical body experiencing the human emotion of anger in a sinless way, because we know that Jesus was without sin, as it says in Hebrews. But here's what Paul also has to say in Galatians. He says, the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurities, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. And I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law, and those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. And so we see that anger is this human emotion that we all experience, and it's not a bad emotion. It has a very important role to play in our human life. It helps us to understand the world around us, helps us to understand what's happening to us and those around us. But we see here, fits of anger are juxtaposed, or kind of contrasted with all these fruits of the Spirit. And one of the ones I think is most juxtaposed with this is self-control. If we're going to experience this anger as we do, we need to have some self-control in it. And so I think a really helpful way of understanding this is that God's intention for us is to respond to our anger in a Spirit-filled way. And everyone here nods their heads and says, "Yes, Pastor Tim, that sounds great." But what happens when we're at a restaurant and our kid decides to have a tantrum and they throw their food onto the person next to them? Or what happens when I'm trying to have the 15th conversation with my teenager about limits on their phone and they're just shutting me off? What do I do with that spirit-filled anger that I'm supposed to have at that point? Well, that's kind of what we're going to be talking about, because we all experience these. We have we all have difficulties with how we respond to anger. And so the reason that I think it's really important for us to talk about anger as parents, and I can talk about this first as like a youth pastor's perspective, and this is one of the reasons I want to talk about this, is that, I don't hear this a lot from kids, but every once in a while you hear about the effects of a parent's anger on the teen. And it's kind of heartbreaking to see, for instance, maybe a teen and their primary understanding of their relationship with their parent might be one of receiving anger from them. That's something that we need to deal with, right? There's implications for the ways in which we deal with our anger with our children. And again, this is an emotion. We're always going to have emotions with our kids, very strong emotions. But we have a responsibility as parents to know, how are we going to, what kind of gifts are we going to give them? We kind of talk about this. I try to remind parents as much as I can that each of you, with your kids, you're raising miniature versions of yourself. They are going to, the habits that you have with your anger are the habits that they're going to have with their anger. And the ways in which you interact with them in the midst of your anger is going to leave, they're going to be left with something at the end of that. And do you want your relationship with them to be one that's primarily one of kind of feeling like they always need to kind of brace against some anger? Or do you want it to be something where they know that they have, that you're a human being, they're a human being, and that you guys can be vulnerable with each other without fear of allowing the anger to be always getting kind of out of control in the midst of that. So again, this is why we want to talk about this, because this is a really important thing that's going to have implications for us in our relationship with our kids for a long time. And we are passing some of these tools and the ways in which we interact with anger down to our kids, and they will continue to pass it on to their kids as well. And so a lot of you here do this really well with your kids, and some of you may have a little bit more work on it. I don't know. That's something you have to think about for yourself. I know every single one of us does a really good job, Jess and I included, of having a version of ourselves that we like to show people, and then, behind closed doors, then when we get to kind of let the veneer down. And so that's why, working with Jess on this, because she has been a marriage and family therapist for 9 years. She's worked with a lot of parents and just families in general who deal with a lot of anger and the repercussions of that. And so she has some tools in her toolkit that she's used with a lot of other parents that might be helpful for us today. So I'm going to hand it over to Jess now.
I'm going to put this down. I'm a little shorter than you. I would say that a lot of these tools are not just things that I'm like, here world, here clients, this is for you. These are things that I've learned that I need to practice as a parent. I think I've kind of always been described as a calm person, and it wasn't until I had kids that I realized, no, I'm actually an angry person too. And I want to talk a little bit about, actually, I don't know how to use this. We should talk about this. The right one? Okay. I want to talk a little bit about what anger is and why it's happening, and maybe why God would even give us this emotion. It's kind of annoying to feel like this is something that we don't get to always be in control of, or it can harm relationships. But it's also something that helps us get out of situations that are maybe harmful for us, or tells us about something that may harm someone else that we love. And so God gave us this emotion. It's a physiological reaction in our body, right? It's a fight or flight response. We get a flood of stress hormones when we get into this state. And so we might have increased heart rate, we might start breathing faster. And so what happens when this happens is our thinking brain goes offline. And that's great. It's good that that happens if a bear is chasing you. Not super great if you are having a conversation with your 3-year-old, right? That our body is kind of doing the same thing once we get to that point of kind of quick response so the bear doesn't eat you, right? And we know that our kid isn't going to eat us, hopefully, but that it has to be quick, because if we're thinking when that bear is coming at us, is this one of those friendly bears, or is this one of those like eating me bears? Then we're going to get eaten. So this is made to be quick as a protective mechanism. We live in a society now where we have less of these physical threats, but our nervous system is still kind of primed in that way. And so we need to think about, like, how is this maybe happening as parents when we are overwhelmed, when we are overstimulated, when our kids' emotions are really big? How do we make it that our thinking brain stays online when theirs is not? Let's see. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens in Tim and I's bodies when this happens, because one of the things I want to work on today with you guys is being aware of that is even happening, because that's one of the biggest things that we can do, right? Like, we can't always, sometimes we get there and it's like, I'm already there, now I have to just cope with it or repair after it. But ideally, we're getting to a place where we can kind of notice, kind of, if we think about a thermometer, right, that we're kind of rising in temperature. So why don't you talk a little bit, Tim, about what you notice in your body when you're feeling angry?
Yeah, so I had to think about this morning a little bit more, but because I'm not always very good about noticing it. But when I do, I think I feel like my head gets kind of warm. Which this is going to sound really weird, but this is actually what you're supposed to do. Is that you're supposed to notice what happens in your body, and there's things that happen. So my head gets kind of warm, and it almost is like I get into like a, not tunnel vision, like I can still see fine, but it's like my mind just kind of closes in a little bit, and I'm just like, okay, which is like you're reacting to a threat. I'm needing to just focus on what this is right now. This thing is threatening to me, and I usually kind of shut down a little bit. I'm less talkative, and usually I try to like kind of bury it. But then when you bury it, it's kind of like plugging a volcano. At some point, it's going to explode. So, so that's kind of what happens with me.
Yeah, and I think for me, like, there's like, again, it's like if we think about a thermometer, when I'm just irritated, I'm maybe having a dialogue in my head about all the things this person is doing wrong, or all the things in this situation that aren't working for me. And then as I start to kind of, like, if I'm higher on that, it's more physiological for me. Like, my heart rate goes faster, it's harder for me to breathe. I have the same thing. My tunnel vision looks more like racing thoughts, where like I'm not really thinking. I'm in panic mode. It's like a very overstimulating kind of feeling. And then if I get to the very top, I have an adult tantrum. I start stomping my feet. It's not like repeatedly, right? But like, it's a physical thing where like I can feel my body wanting to do that. My voice might get loud. And that's when we get to that point, then it's harder to kind of come back down, but we can. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in our brain when this is happening. We're going to talk about what happens when we flip our lid. So let's all put our hands up for a moment. Something I do with kids, but I think it's good for us adults too. So this is our brain. At the base of our brain, our wrist, we're going to pretend that's our brain stem. This is responsible for things like breathing, keeping your heart pumping. You're not having to like monitor these. These are automatic, thankfully, right? If you had to tell your body like, okay, heart, go again, we couldn't do that. So thankfully, God made it so that is automatic. Then our thumb, we're going to fold that in the middle. It's in the middle of the brain. This is our amygdala. So this is responsible for sensing danger in our brain and our body. This is where our emotion center of our brain is, and it perceives and responds to emotions. And then we're going to wrap our fingers over the top of our amygdala here, of our thumb. This is our prefrontal cortex. This is the part of our brain that helps us manage emotions. It helps us make decisions. It helps us to be able to think into the future. If we think about our kids, depends on how developed they are, but like this part of their brain is under construction. They are running mostly on this part of their brain. We call this our downstairs brain. This is our upstairs brain. And so when ours goes offline, everyone's running around with their lids flipped, right? And so ideally, we want to be the most mature one in the room. And most of the time we are, right? But sometimes our lid gets flipped, and that's harder. So again, like that fight or flight response, when our lid is flipped, it's because we're responding to a threat, okay? And so we need to recognize that this is harder for our kids. It's not developed until like 25, 26. They're actually thinking it's later now, which is great news, right? And so it takes a while for our kids to be good at that self-regulation. It's nice if we can kind of model that self-control, but it's hard. It's not like they are taking breaks in between their need for us, or they're considering us and our emotion regulation when they're in relationship with us. Did you have something you want to say?
Yes. All right, so can we make this practical and talk about some scenarios and what's happening in the brain then?
Sure.
With the whole flipping the lid thing?
Yep.
All right, so I know for me, when Bethany was born, I think I was not prepared for how long it would take her sometimes to go to sleep, and I would get really, really angry. So for a parent with a infant or 1 or 2 year old that's just like not going to sleep, and they're just like feeling all the, like their anger is rising, what's happening there?
Right, so you're probably starting the evening like thinking about what a beautiful baby I have. Tonight's gonna be a better night. She's gonna go to sleep better. I have a plan, I read the books, whatever. And then as she's going, again, I was talking before about that dialogue. Sometimes it's not this external threat to our system, it's like what we're telling ourselves too, right? So like, I'm imagining you being in this dark room, having a conversation with yourself about how you're never gonna have free time ever again. Your baby is going to be in this stage forever. And if you think about like that feels like death, right? That feels, again, that triggers our fight or flight response. It feels scary. It feels very trapped feeling. And again, if we stay in that place, which is, I think, again, that's thankfully gotten easier when we've had more kids of like, oh no, this does pass. But that was a very scary time of like, oh my gosh, our whole life is bedtime now. And so that at that point, once you're kind of like, again, like that narrative, it's hard to kind of, that's what flips our lid. We're not thinking rationally now. Now we're reacting.
Mm-hmm. So the prefrontal cortex is going offline, and I'm at risk of just reacting and like
Yeah,
this
you might want to stomp a little bit.
Right?
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Might want to call you in and
Yeah,
ask
take
for some
over,
help.
yes, yeah.
Which we've done a good number of times.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what about, let's say, let's go back to kind of like our example from before, where you're having, like, your teen, you tell them to get off the phone,
Sure.
or stop playing video games, and it's been like an hour. You've told them like 6 times, and they're just saying, one more minute, and
An hour, that is a long time, yes. Yes, right,
So
yes,
what's happening
so you've had a whole hour to stew now, right? Like, you probably went into this with the hopes that this time would be different. And then again, I wonder about the narrative that you might be telling yourself during it. Like, if it's not necessarily just anger, but there's other emotions underneath, like this fear of, what if my kid doesn't turn out the way I want them to? What if they can't listen? Where's our relationship going? It might bring up some insecurities in you, or it might bring up some frustrations in terms of like your kid having different values than you. And so like there's a lot of different emotions or narratives we might be telling ourselves. But if you're sitting in that for an hour, it's again starts to feel like the end is a life or death feeling, right? Like if that's the case, this is our kid. We've invested at this point at least 13 years in them. And this idea that like this isn't going how I want it to, or this is like, depending on how far down this line of thinking we get, it's going to feel life or death. We feel out of control. Again, that other slide talked about powerlessness being a really big trigger for anger. That would be one of those situations too.
Right. Yeah. Okay, cool. Is there anything else you want to say before we
Nope.
sessions? Cool. And
Oh, I want to show the,
oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, go to
it's
that.
not clicking though. Can you help me
Go to the
click?
next slide.
Okay, so this is going to be on your handout as well. But this is just a nice illustration for the discussion coming up about what is visible. It's our fight or flight response. A lot of times it's anger. So, I mean, we can get into other things. It can be like anxiety too. But in this case, we're talking about anger. But underneath, what else is underneath that may be more invisible? And that's what we're talking about, maybe being a little bit more aware of for ourselves.
Yeah, and so when you're talking about like, when you were giving the example of talking to the teenager, like what comes out is anger, but there's so many other narratives going
Yeah.
on underneath, and the same with what you're responding to, a baby that's not sleeping, or
Right.
any kind of situation. Like anger might be the thing that manifests itself, but just like an iceberg, there's many things underneath, and also just we all here are products or in the midst of immigration, and that families with immigration, like there's these different cultures going on too. And so I know that one of the frustrations that might be really strong at times might be that, I literally changed my entire world to give my kid this better education. Why don't they seem like they're appreciating it? Why aren't they doing a better job with the resources that they now have? And there could be, and maybe even some fears about like, okay, I brought them to America. Now they seem like they're much more American than Chinese, and that can bring up questions of like, what kind of values do they have, and some perhaps even anger at the fact that they are choosing to have some values more associated with American culture than Chinese culture, or even when we can talk about this in terms of Christians too, because I know that this is the kind of these are the kind of fears that my parents had with me, and I'm sure these are the kind of fears I'm going to continue to have with my kids too. Is that we're raising them to love Jesus and to have these certain Christian values, but we're also we decided to have them go to a public school, and we're having they're watching Netflix, right? Like there's these different messages that are that they're being taught that might not be the things that we want, and there's just a lot of frustration there. And so there can be a lot of things kind of going on underneath our anger that is really helpful to recognize. So we're going to give you guys some time now to discuss all of this, which could, you could discuss it for quite a long time. We're going to give you 10 minutes. So there's a couple discussion questions on your sheet. Get into those groups that you guys just formed. We're going to be talking about what does your anger look like, and really what's underneath that anger as well. So we'll come back around 11:49. I almost asked for examples. Like, instead of me, I thought I asked for examples. And also, I was like, I figured that.
Those Secret Service guys last night, they got right around Trump when it was totally in control.
Oh, yeah.
Is that trained in, or do they got to find the right personnel?
Right, so
During a fight, I tend to do that. Yeah, like your body's kind of like there's a fight for freeze. There's like a freeze. Yeah, that's a response to this kind of. And I think it's true.
All right, I'll give you guys 1 minute to wrap up. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. That's right. There's always everything can't be controlled, so it should be controlled. All right, I'll take you start.
All right, are we ready? Let's wrap up. Okay. Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about what our responsibility is as parents. What's the hope? What do we do? And so because we can't avoid this happening, thankfully there are tools that we can use. And I think a lot of these are things that God has specifically given us. So that we can use to cope not only in the moment, but hopefully we can kind of also increase our self-awareness of, again, like what's happening and increasing the chances of getting to that place where we flip our lid. So I want to talk a little bit about a couple terms here. So one of the things I've been talking about is self-awareness. So ideally that's looks like monitoring our emotions and thoughts throughout the day. We can't obviously do this for every thought. We have like 80,000 of them a day. Like there's no way we can monitor every single one of them. But ideally we get into a practice of checking in. right? And so people who have mindfulness practices, that's something that's been talked about a lot more in the last decade or so. That's something that's very helpful for this. It's a way that we train our brain to not only notice what's going on, but then also to kind of, it's like walking a dog. Oh, we don't want to go over there, come back over here, kind of a practice. The other one that I like to talk about with clients specifically is every time you wash your hands, that's a great opportunity or a great prompt or a pairing of let's check in with ourselves. What am I thinking? What's going on right now? What am I feeling? Anything I need right now? And so if we're a great hand washer, we'll be doing this a lot. Even if we're an average hand washer, that's enough time throughout the day to kind of help us redirect, right? And I'm going to show a little bit of a visual representation of what can happen throughout the day and why it might be helpful to be checking in and
Sorry,
redirecting.
Can I interrupt and say
Yeah.
something real quick? Something I feel like I've seen in churches and Christian groups a lot is that people think that that kind of relying on God or like handing it over to God is the most helpful thing. And but what sometimes happens is that they become less self-aware because they're saying, okay, I feel this, or maybe they feel anger coming up. And instead of just kind of noticing what's going on and like, okay, how do I deal with this? Like, no, I gotta stuff it, hand it over to God. And so I've seen that in Christian circles a lot, where we are actually sometimes less self-aware because we feel like that being controlled by the Spirit is the opposite of feeling our human emotions. That
Sure,
God gave us.
sure.
That sounds good.
Well, I will talk specifically a little bit about how we might use prayer or some of those like in a way of coping in a moment. And I'm talking about the next. So coping being are more of the temporary strategies we use in the moment. So this is like when we're like maybe an 8 or above and we're needing to come down quickly. So these are going to be things like this might be leaving a room or calling in your spouse to take over. This might be taking some deep breaths, counting to 10, those kinds of things. If we think about what we were talking about earlier with our brain, that there are parts of our body that when we go into a fight or flight response that are not, we can't tell our heart, slow down your beating, okay, blood pressure, chill out. We can't do that, but we can, how we can influence that part, that parasympathetic response is through breathing. That's something that happens automatically, but something we can specifically do ourselves and like relaxing our muscles. So that's a really quick way to speak to our nervous system and tell it, hey, it's safe. There's not actually a bear right now. This is also, I think, where prayer can come in too. So when I think about some of the exercises I sometimes do with people about like quickly teaching your nervous system to re-regulate and feel safe again. So like even envisioning being with a safe person or that they're next to you or you're in a safe place, if you do that really quickly, your body feels safe. And I think that that can also happen when we think about the safety we feel with our connection to God. Like that's, I think, also a way that if we're leaning into that part of it, can be helpful in those moments. But yeah, coping can be, they're like those quick things, leaving the room, taking a walk, getting a nap, taking a shower. And then self-care I see as more like the foundational stuff. So that's more things like I'm getting enough sleep, I'm eating well. Where am I at on here? The time with God, community, friends, those kinds of things. These can be things like we're using our brain, right? We're learning, we have hobbies. Those are things that help with that. Oh, I need to go. Oh, there we go. So this is a nice visual representation. A lot of what I'm talking about today is from Daniel Siegel. He has a lot of parenting stuff and talks a lot about what's happening in our brain and our kids' brains. So he has something called the Healthy Mind Platter, which is made to kind of model after, if we think about the food pyramid, or now it's the food platter. These are the things that we need each day for optimal brain matter, or for our brain to be functioning the best. So on here we have sleep, physical activity, time to focus or be like kind of zoned in and doing a task. Time in, he's talking about, again, the self-awareness, self-reflection. This could look like prayer, meditation, Bible reading, This could just look like, again, those like hand washing reflections. Play is something really important. As adults, we lose, but our kids and teens are good at. It's very helpful for our brains to be able to do that too. And then connecting, this is like the social part of us. We need relationships. We're built this way. So these are great examples of what self-care is. I want to draw a bit of what kind of happens throughout the day and how these kind of play out. And then we'll give you guys a chance to talk about this. I'll just hold this. Tim?
Sure.
Okay. All right, so I like visuals, so I'm gonna draw you a visual. I'm used to talking to people one-on-one, so I'm not used to this kind of a big one, so I might be in the way here. Up here on this graph is anger, or stress, we'll call it. This is our stress response. Down here is gonna represent calm or peace. The space in between is like our bandwidth. I don't know what else to call it, so that's what we're calling it. That's like kind of the room we have in our emotional tank or capacity to kind of respond to things throughout the day. I need to see it. Thank you. And so we can kind of see the 0 down here and 10 down here, just to be. Can you hear me? Good. Okay.
No, it's not.
It's not on.
I think you accidentally turned it off.
Oh.
There you go.
Is that better? There we go. Okay. So let's say I got a good night's sleep. I'm going to start my day down here. Okay, so I'm feeling pretty good, but as soon as I come out of my bedroom, my unnamed spouse is grumpy. I'm just kidding. And then let's say he quickly apologizes and gives me a hug. I feel a little bit better. So that's like, I feel better. I come back down. And it's not necessarily something I did. That's something that happened to me. And then let's say things are kind of crazy. I'm running late, so I start feeling stressed. I'm worried about, being late to my first meeting. And then I realize I forgot the kids' coats and it's cold today, and what if the teachers think I'm a bad mom, right? So that's like an internal thing, and that really stresses me out. And let's say my first meeting of the day is kind of tough. And then let's say I realize I'm not feeling so good, so I take some deep breaths. I take a moment to re-regulate. I remind myself it's going to be okay. And I actually see a friend. They remind me I'm not a bad mom. Feeling much better, okay? But I'm still not where I was when I woke up. And then let's say, I don't know, it's the afternoon now. I'm kind of tired, so I'm coming back up here. I don't remember what else I had. Oh, kids are fighting, right? And then let's say Tim's grumpy again. And then here's probably where I flip my lid, right? And for me, sometimes this looks like I'm not necessarily mad at Tim, I get mad at the kids, right? Or both, right? And so if I had not gotten good sleep, my day would have started here, right? I would have been at work and had a really hard time, right? And if I have, let's say like some chronic stress going on in my life, or I'm struggling with my mental health, or there's something going on, maybe chronic pain, right? Like my baseline is probably smaller, and so I tend to do like a bit of a ping pong. And so if we think about this bandwidth, we can influence that by the self-care, the mind platter stuff. That gives us more room, and we're taking care, that's the stuff that gives us, if we're getting good sleep, if we're eating regularly, we have a social community, all those things, that ideally gives us more space over time. The things in the moment, these are the things that we do to come down. These are like the coping things, right? So those are the things that in the moment bring us back down. What else would I want to talk about then? So, yeah.
Oh.
Yes. Yeah, the time in is like self-reflection. It's like taking a moment. So for some people, this is journaling or meditation or Bible reading. So it's like taking time to kind of notice, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What's going on in my body? Sorry, there's two.
That's fine.
And so, yeah, so this is an example of kind of like what that might look like throughout the day for us. And how we might be aware of, like, it's not necessarily our kid. Sometimes it is. Let's say I've been, like, this is all family related. It's a Saturday. We're together all day, right? That's probably going to be more influenced by them. But what is up here is more about me sometimes and, like, how I'm feeling than it always is about them. And so this is, I think, where we're talking about, like, it's not necessarily wrong to, anger can be a helpful emotion when we're like, I don't like that you did that. That doesn't align with, like, what our values are in this family or what I want for you. And I'm using that as kind of a jumping off point of, like, a values thing. But the, like, self-control in which I'm using that to parent, ideally, we're doing that from a place of in the middle, right? So I say, it's nice to do that no higher than a 6. Okay. It doesn't always work that way, as we're talking about, but, so, any questions or things you want to add about that?
No, yeah, I think so. Essentially, we're talking about having a more of a, again, going back to self-awareness of what's going on for us internally and externally, and how those specific points in which we are, like, especially if our kids are going to school, like, we see them at this, like, very kind of like this flood of rushing to get ready for the day, and there's a lot of high stress there. And then you go to, if you're working, or maybe you come back home and you're doing stuff around the house, there can be these ups and downs. And then when you re-engage with your kids later on, that can be it can be really helpful to think, what's been going on in my day? How is this going to affect how I'm going to be feeling once I see my kids again? And they are inevitably going to be kids. They're not going to want to eat dinner. They're not going to listen to everything I say. Spouse will be grumpy, like always, or something like that, you know.
Tim's not that grumpy, I promise. He's actually not. One thing that I tell couples, but I think this fits with families as well, is the first 15 minutes in which we meet up again is often where the most conflict happens, because it's, again, has to do with we're not regulated. And so if we can just be especially aware during those first 15 minutes of that transition, we can actually avoid quite a bit. And right before bed when we're tired is not a great time.
Yeah, right.
So do you want to do some discussion?
Yeah, so let's get back into our small groups. You guys got the questions on your sheet again. So 2 questions to talk about proactive strategies for anger, and then also talk about how do you respond to anger in the moment. So in some of this, I think Jess was also wanting to make sure that we all knew that some of this isn't just like, this is what I need to do now. Pretty much all of us have, like, we do this already. We already cope with our anger in ways. And so some of this will be just identifying, okay, how do I do that? Like, what, and how can I be more aware and remember that that's something that is helpful for me when I get angry. Or maybe you hear something from another parent that might be like, okay, that is something that I want to do more. So that's what this time is for. So you guys get 10 more minutes to discuss in your groups, and we'll come back and we'll wrap things up. Yeah, I realized I should have put it more forward. I think they got the idea. lot of this was, I learned a lot from just doing this.
Who are you? Right up there, like if you don't fight this, you're spending
Yeah, all of this is actually pretty short. So,
yeah, compare this
remember what time we wrapped in? 58, 59? Said 12 and 9. Come back. So, is that noon? Just go to or something? Or just something we want to.
Yeah. Get groceries. Groceries are coming.
Okay.
Tomorrow we have BBS.
Yep.
And I'm with Desperate.
Hope so. After we go into
You can't just like go and what do you do with that second?
What's that?
Well, I can find out. I just, wait, what did you say?
We can.
All right, we'll give you guys one more minute to wrap up. All right, I just got one more thing to kind of briefly discuss. It's really more of a reminder for all of us. We got to remember that the goal isn't necessarily to never flip our lid or to never get angry, because that's just simply not possible. But the goal is for us to respond to our anger in a spirit-filled way. And so inevitably, when we do get angry, how are we supposed to deal with that? Because anger with our kids does leave a mark. But thankfully, we know that there's ways to repair from this. So research actually shows that when you compare families that have a fair amount of conflict to families that don't have as much conflict, they can actually be just as healthy with each other if the families that have a fair amount of conflict are doing lots of repair. And the ratio that they've kind of found to be the kind of magic number is that when you have like an outburst of anger against your kid and there's needing to be some repair, the ratio needs to be 1 to 5. And so if you are, if you have a moment of kind of exposed anger or like lashing out at your kid, 5 points of repair with them are going to kind of help rebuild that in it's not the same, but you are helping to repair that relationship so that it can continue to be healthy. And so, yeah, sure.
Is it on?
Yeah, it was on.
It is on?
Yep.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily just anger. It's just like any moment we have a negative interaction, we need to keep in mind it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. That it's more about, if you think about it, the more positive interactions you have, it's kind of like money in the emotional bank account in that relationship, right? And so that those relationships with an abundance of positive interactions are sturdier to be able to handle the human nature of making mistakes, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm totally taking over for you.
That's
Want
right.
to talk about examples?
No, it's fine. You can talk about it if you want, but yeah, I mean, you can see up there these by repairs. We're not talking about like, oh man, I got angry at my kid. Now I need to go buy them the video game that they wanted, or something like that. Like we're talking about like really little things actually. Like even just like putting your hand on their shoulder, asking them how their day was. Like these little things of reconnecting with them actually do add up quite a bit. And so that's what we're talking about, like this ratio of 1 to 5. And it's not necessarily that you need to like, I would assume, count it, but you should be mindful of how you're interacting with them after you've done something. And especially as Christians, we know that one of the first things we should do is to apologize to our kids, because that's extremely helpful, especially for when we're talking about discipling our kids. If we want them to be able to know what it's like to just be okay being a human being that makes mistakes and needs a savior, we need to show them that we too, as your parents, make mistakes and need a savior. And so just apologizing to them is a really helpful way to show that. But and I know different cultures here, and probably everything that we've just talked about is, I'm sure it's no surprise to many of you that this is a very Western way of thinking. I know from talking to second and third gen folks that saying I'm sorry, verbally apologizing might not be as comfortable or as natural for first generation Chinese folks. But when the the hard part is that when first-gen parents are raising Americanized kids, the ways in which they kind of receive and understand the language of repair is going to be more Americanized. And so where if the whole family was just living in China and in this Chinese culture, the assumptions are like, oh yeah, my mom made me something to eat after she got angry. Like they understand that. They might not value that as much in America. They might, and parents might be really frustrated. Like, well, don't they know that I love them? I showed them. I did all these things for them. And they can make a list of things that are genuine acts of repair. But the kid might come back if they ever got to the point of actually talking about this and say like, but you didn't say it, right? And that can be really frustrating, really hard. And so but it's also important to talk with your kids about like, if it's hard for you, just say that too to them. It's like, it's hard for me to know what to say in these kind of moments. But I do love you. And this is one of the ways that I tried to show it. And when you see me doing this, kind of know that this is what I'm trying to say to you, even if I don't say it, right? And so having those kind of conversations with your kids, especially as they get to be teenagers, can be a really, really helpful thing as you're trying to help them to be human beings in this very human world. I will put a little asterisk on the last one, tell a joke. In all the times that I need to repair with Jess, telling a joke works about 1 time out of 10. And I still believe that if I get the right joke, it will be worth 5 repairs and that it will make everything else fine. But I have yet to experience that. So
to be able to read the room for that one to work.
yeah, right. Which I'm not always great at doing. All right, we have just a few book resources that Jess uses a lot. Can you go to, there we go. Jess, you want to talk very quickly about what these books are?
Yeah, I just wanted to include these because these are a lot of I didn't realize how much of Daniel Siegel I've been using. I just thought it was my own stuff, but nope, Daniel Siegel.
Can you say who Daniel Siegel is?
Yeah, so he does a lot of stuff around neuroscience and the developing brain, as well as talking about what's happening in our parenting brain. So he does a lot with parenting. So we have the whole brain child, which has to do with the underdeveloped upstairs brain of a kid, and like what to do with that as a parent. Parenting from the inside out is kind of what we're talking about today. Understanding ourselves as parents so that when we're parenting, we're aware of kind of what's coming up for us. No Drama Discipline talks about helping us understand like what we're wanting the goal of discipline to be and strategies for that. And then Brainstorm is about what's happening in our teens' brains. And is an excellent book as well. So.
Yeah, and that last one, I've actually talked to some, I think last year when we had our parent night with the youth group, some of that stuff I talked about quite a bit, and talked about how like what's happening in a teen's brain as they're separating from parents as they naturally grow up and get to be their own individual adults. So really helpful stuff. So we're gonna end with some prayer. So I would love for you guys to, instead of having us just pray for you and be done, I'd like for those of you you've spent a little bit of time being vulnerable, talking about your own anger issues and identifying what's going on in yourself. Let's take a little bit of time and just pray for each other. And when you're finished with that, please fill out the survey that we have. This is going to be especially helpful on the last Sunday of the month when the Mandarin and Cantonese parents are going to be kind of reconvening and talking about this a little bit more. But for now, please, sorry, was there questions?
Yep, same.
No! Okay, I will. Ruby, are you able to do that? I think that you need to give permission for the survey.
So he's got it.
Oh, Tom has it. That's weird.
Yeah, right. She has paper ones.
Sure. All right, so before you leave, the paper ones, maybe you can, Ruby, let's hand that out actually at the end. Or I leave them in the back please, we'll get some pens, and just please just leave some very quick comments for us, questions that you have. But right now, just get back to your groups and pray, and when you're done praying, you are dismissed. Thanks a lot. Yeah.